Kelly O'Donnell, NBC.
Thank you, Mr. President. Do you believe what you said? Thank you, sir. Do you believe what you said, that Putin can't remain in power? Or do you now regret saying that because your government has been trying to walk that back? Did your words complicate matters?
Well, you asked 3 different questions. I'll answer them all. Number 1, I'm not walking anything back. The fact of the matter is I was expressing the moral outrage I felt toward the way Putin is dealing and the actions of this man. Just brutality. Half the children in Ukraine. I just come from being with those families. But I want to make it clear, I wasn't then, nor am I now, articulating a policy change. I was expressing the moral outrage that I feel, and I make no apologies for it.
Personal feelings, sir. Your personal feelings?
My personal feelings. Secondly, you asked me about, well, what was the second part?
Does it complicate the diplomacy of this moment?
No, I don't think it does. You know, the fact is that we're in a situation where what complicates the situation at the moment is the escalatory efforts of Putin to continue to engage in carnage, the kind of behavior that makes the whole world say, my God, what is this man doing? That's what complicates things a great deal. But I don't think it complicates it at all.
Mr. President,
Let me go to Steve Holland, Reuters.
Mr. President, thank you. When you say that you're not walking anything back, you do feel that Vladimir Putin should be removed from power? Is that what you're saying?
No, what I was expressing just what I said. I was expressing the moral outrage I felt towards this man. I wasn't articulating a policy change. And I think that, you know, he continues on this course that he's on. He is going to become a pariah worldwide, and who knows what he becomes at home in terms of support.
And just to follow up, are you concerned this remark might escalate the conflict?
No, I'm not. I'm not at all. Look,
not, sir? Thank you.
And you know, look, the other thing is that a couple people have asked me as well, might well speak to it unless you want to ask the question, but you know, that other governments have suggested that this is a problem, I'm escalating things. No. And has it weakened NATO? No, it hadn't. NATO has never, ever, 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 ever been as strong as it is today. Never.
so if saying he cannot remain in power does not mean regime change, what does it mean in your opinion?
It means that I would hope it was expressing my outrage. He shouldn't remain in power. Just like, you know, bad people shouldn't continue to do bad things. But it doesn't mean we have a fundamental policy to do anything to take Putin down in any way.
What made you add that? Because that wasn't in your prepared remarks, we were told. So what made you add that at the end, Mr. President?
Because I was talking to the Russian people. The last part of the speech was talking to the Russian people, telling them what we thought. And I was communicating this to not only the Russian people, but the whole world. This is just stating a simple fact that this kind of behavior is totally unacceptable. Totally unacceptable. And the way to deal with it is to strengthen and keep NATO completely united and help Ukraine where we can. Cleve, you had a question. Where is he?
Thanks, Mr. President. On your budget, you've said repeatedly at the State of the Union that you're not for defunding the police. I do wonder how much emphasis you think should be put on alternative forms of crime prevention, not just defunding the police, but you know, crime reduction in communities.
Oh, a significant amount. I've laid that out in detail in the budget. For example, we do know that intervention programs work. We do know that what police need, they need psychologists in the department as much as they need extra rifles. They need people who are in the department who can deal with the crisis that the police are going through as well, dealing with their crises, dealing with their mental state and how they're handling things. They need social workers engaged with them. I lay it all out. And it all works. If you see these community intervention programs, they work. They actually reduce crime. They significantly reduce crime. So that's a big piece of it.
Just a follow-up. Is any of it related to political pressure from Republicans saying that Democrats are soft on crime, that you guys are careening to the left?
Isn't it kind of fascinating? When I first got elected, I was being beat up because I supported the police too much for the previous 30 years. No, that's what I think. Ozma.
Surprised to get called. Thank you, Mr. President. Are you willing to try to meet with Vladimir Putin? And I have a quick follow-up to that. When you last met with him face-to-face in Geneva, you had described that as a productive conversation. You said that he did not want a Cold War. And do you feel, given the actions, though, that have happened over the last few months, I guess I'm asking what has changed in his mind?
I don't know what's changed his mind. His behavior's changed. When we met, remember what we were talking about. We were talking about setting up a strategic dialogue and talking about the relationship of NATO and Russia and facing off in the regions and how we could have more transparency and all the rest. It was a normal discussion I had going all the way back to Kosygin and others back in 100 years ago when I was a young senator. And so what changed was nothing remotely approaching that. Remember when he first met with me, he said, I have two objectives. This is the second or third time I met with him. He said, I have two objectives. One is to make sure that they never become part of NATO, and two, to make sure there are no long-range missiles in there, in Ukraine. I said, we can deal with the second one easily, but we can't close the door on the first. Because when we talk about missiles, we want to talk about what's also on the Russian border heading toward Europe. Do both. And then, if you notice, that demand list of his, not with me, with others, have escalated significantly in terms of what he thinks is necessary. Thank you.
Mr. President, we need some more clarification. Mr. President,
thank you. Thank you very much.
I know you're going to ask a really nice question.
Well, it's an important question, I think. Are you worried that other leaders in the world are going to start to doubt that America is back if some of these big things that you say on the world stage keep getting walked back?
What's getting walked back?
It made it sound like, just in the last couple days, it sounded like you told U.S. troops they were going to Ukraine. It sounded like you said it was possible the U.S. would use a chemical weapon, and it sounded like you were calling for regime change in Russia, and we know...
None of the three occurred.
None of the three occurred?
None of the three.
Mr. President?
You interpret the language that way. I was talking to the troops. We were talking about helping train the troops that are the Ukrainian troops that are in Poland. That's what the context. I sat there with those guys for a couple hours. That's what we talked about.
So when you said you're going to see when you're there, you were not intending to
I was referring to meeting with and talking with the Ukrainian troops that were in Poland.
And when you said a chemical weapon use by Russia would trigger a response in kind.
It will trigger a significant response.
What does that mean?
I'm not going to tell you. Why would I tell you? You got to be silly.
The world wants to know.
The world wants to know a lot of things. I'm not telling them what the response would be. Then Russia knows the response.
Mr. President.
All right, I'm going to take two more questions. One, two.
Mr. President, thank you.
I still want to get back to your original words that he cannot remain in power. Can you help us understand, you have more foreign policy experience than any president who has ever held this office. Whether those are your personal feelings or your feelings as president, do you understand why people would believe you, as someone commanding one of the largest nuclear arsenals in the world, saying someone cannot remain in power is a statement of U.S. policy? And also, are you concerned about propaganda use of those remarks by the Russians?
No and no.
Tell me why. You have so much experience. You are the leader of this country.
Because it's ridiculous. Nobody believes we're going to take down. I was talking about taking down Putin. Nobody believes that. Number one. Number two, what have I been talking about since this all began? The only war that's worse than one intended is one that's unintended. The last thing I want to do is engage in a land war or a nuclear war with Russia. That's not part of it. I was expressing my outrage at the behavior of this man. It's outrageous. It's outrageous. And it's more an aspiration than anything. He shouldn't be in power. There's no, people like this shouldn't be ruling countries, but they do. The fact they do, but doesn't mean I can't express my outrage about it. Last question.
Thank you. You've said that you're confident that your comment won't undermine diplomatic efforts. But just to be clear, are you confident that Vladimir Putin sees it that way, that he will not use this as an escalatory?
I don't care what he thinks. Look, here's the deal. He's going to do what he's going to do. Putin, look.
But you're not concerned that he may see your language and view that as a sign of a reason for escalation, use that as an excuse to escalate, given his recent behavior?
Given his recent behavior, you should, excuse me, I shouldn't say that to you. Given his recent behavior, people should understand that he is going to do what he thinks he should do, period. He's not affected by anybody else, including, unfortunately, apparently his own advisors. This is a guy who goes to the beat of his own drummer. And the idea that he is going to do something outrageous because I called him for what he was and what he's doing, I think is just not rational.
You didn't say whether you'd meet him again. Would you meet with President Putin ever again?
It depends. No, it's not a question of the question is there something to meet on that would justify him being able to end this war and be able to rebuild Ukraine?
So there is a
That's the issue.
Can you just sorry, can you say yes or no, Mr. President, whether or not you would be willing to meet with President Putin
It
again?
depends on what he wants to talk about.
Thank you. Okay, last question.
What if he wanted to talk about negotiations? Now, what if he
Hello,
wanted to?
you said Supreme Court. I don't play that.
Well, you can't leave that hanging. Just real quick, two matters on the Supreme Court. While you were away, there were reports about the wife of Justice Thomas and texts that she had with former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. Should Justice Thomas recuse himself from any cases involving the January 6th insurrection or former President Trump at this point?
I'd leave that to two entities.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Ask the second question.
No, two entities. Go ahead. Sorry.
One, the January 6th committee, and two, the Justice Department. That's their judgment, not mine to make.
So on Justice Thomas recusing, you don't think he should, or?
I said that. I told you. Those things get into legal issues. That, in fact, I told you I would not tell the Justice Department what position to take or not take. And I'm not going to instruct the Congress either.
And did you get any chance to watch much of the Judiciary Committee
I
hearings
didn't get a
last
chance to
week?
see any of it, unfortunately.
The fact that Republicans were questioning Judge Jackson on matters like former sentences related to child pornography cases or the definition of a woman, does that, as the former chairman of the Judiciary Committee, make sense to you?
Look, this is one of the most qualified nominees ever nominated for the Supreme Court in every respect, in terms of her disposition, her intellectual capacity, her experience and background, serving on three additional courts, a woman who is totally, thoroughly qualified, and will be a great addition to the court, in my view. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, sir.
Do you